And we want to open the top of the show with Ed Woodward. He's finishing up at the football club, and we want to reflect on his legacy. What has he achieved? What has he not achieved? And, how does he finish up, and how he will be remembered by the club and its fans. And I want to open up with a quote. I was doing a bit of research yesterday, because to be fair, I just tuned out from him for a little while, for a few years there. Because I think his legacy can be measured in two different ways: the performances on the pitch and the performances off the pitch commercially, which United remains one of the biggest football clubs brand-wise in the world. And I found this interesting quote, and it goes, and he's saying this, I think, at a board meeting or something: playing performance doesn't really have a meaningful impact on what we can do on the commercial side of the business. Yeah, and I knew that quote would get you going. How would you rate Ed Woodward's time at the club? And maybe a good opportunity for people that don't really know about him, give people a bit of a summary on his role and what he's done.
Well, the reason he was given this position was because he was trusted by the ownership, by the Glazers. And the only thing the Glazers care about are their share dividends, and Ed Woodward delivers on that front, because he came up with this idea of micro partners, of Manchester United having an official noodle partner and an official automotive repair sponsor.
Shout out Nissan.
Yeah,
that's
like
right.
Every single territory in the world, it seems, that has an ability to watch Manchester United games or consume Manchester United social media content has particular regionalised sponsors, and the revenue from all that stuff and the kind of country-to-country approach that Woodward has taken has, to be fair, insulated Manchester United from the financial impacts of their poor performance on the field, which has cost a lot of other clubs who've slipped out of the Champions League, who've gone through such turmoil and not won that many trophies in his time in charge. I do think he was completely unqualified for the position of someone in charge of footballing matters, because he has no football experience. He's not a former player. He's not a former coach. He has really no background in it. He's an investment banker, and that pretty much coloured his entire time in charge. And it seemed to me that a lot of the processes that Manchester United put in place to try and become a modern football club and replace the kind of one-man show that was the Alex Ferguson era, because you can't replace Alex Ferguson. It was a kind of operation where, everything was just in, 1 square foot of real estate, and no one else was really in charge of making the decisions, and there wasn't really a modern scouting department, a modern analytics department. A lot of the processes put in place seem to be just levels of management in between Ed Woodward and kind of the cutting edge of blame. So a lot of it seemed like absolute nonsense to me. Like, he went on some tour I heard about in some of the writings, reflecting on his tenure. I think this might have been Manchester Evening News. He went on this tour around Europe asking all these different clubs, what percentage of the football club is the manager responsible for? I'm like, what kind of a question is that? I wonder what reaction he got. Like, people are like, what do you mean? How is this information useful? It's just like back of a napkin, LinkedIn nonsense. And he still swooped for big, marquee signings, while leaving the other player acquisitions to the managers he appointed and then fired. But none of those really came off. Pogba has not been a success at Manchester United. Ronaldo, it's contentious, I know, but I think that money would have been better spent in defensive midfield. Regardless of what you think about Ronaldo's impact on United, everybody at the club, the fans, the players, the manager, were crying out for a defensive midfielder, and they blew all their cash on making Cristiano Ronaldo the best paid player in the Premier League. So there was just a total disconnect between reality and between Ed Woodward's priorities. So his tenure has been a disaster.
And you talk about that lack of footballing knowledge, and we've talked about, the roles of a technical director and a football director and how important it is to have that understanding of the game itself. And, reading a bunch of different articles, it just seemed that he, one, like you said, didn't know that much about the sport. And that also then meant he made sweeping kind of decisions and handovers of responsibility. I heard when David Moyes first came in, everything was under David Moyes' remit, which meant, and he admitted later on that was a big mistake because, a manager primarily should be focused on the team and the results on the pitch, but
I don't blame
he
him
was
for
being
Moyes.
called around.
I don't blame him for Moyes. That was a captain's
Yeah,
call. That was
yeah.
Sir Alex Ferguson's decision.
Yeah,
And he just did whatever
100%.
Ferguson told him to do. And if you'd ever met Ferguson, I'm sure you would do anything he told you to do as well, because he's fucking scary.
Yeah, 100%. But then with Louis van Gaal as well, I read that they also gave him too much power, and it went from wild things to, because the training ground at Carrington was too windy, they had to plant trees in there and stuff like that. It's wild stuff for someone that obviously just lacked that knowledge to be able to decide what was important to deal with at the time and what wasn't. But I want to play devil's advocate here, because when he came in, Sir Alex and David Gill were both leaving the club. Both, equally important parts of that long period of success at Manchester United. Was it too steep a learning curve to then step in without those two kind of giants of the club? Or having at least one of them with a guiding hand to show him the ropes?
I think it was inevitable that there would be a fall-off after Ferguson's departure because of the one-man show that was his long tenure at the club. The only person he ever really gave responsibility to, I guess, was Carlos Queiroz when he was the assistant manager, and he started doing some of the defensive tactics, away games in the Champions League and so forth. Ferguson very rarely allowed other people to make signings for him or really make any decisions to do with the team. It was all his decisions, his ship that he was captaining. And when that power vacuum opens and you throw an inexperienced guy like Woodward, who's a finance guru, he's a numbers guy, into the role of essentially football director. I mean, his role is executive vice president or something, but, that's what he was.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly, he's going to be thrown in the deep end. What really struck me, though, was that according to reports, he compared the legacy of Ferguson and Sir Matt Busby to an albatross around his neck. I just found that an extraordinary comment, because why do you think you're here? Why do you think you're paid so well to do this job so poorly for so many years? It's because you're in charge of the most storied football club in the world, and it's largely down to those two men. To call that a burden, an albatross, I think displays a real disrespect for what you're in charge of. Like, would you have preferred to take charge of some, conference club or League 2 club where you're paid peanuts to try and build it up from the bottom? Like, Manchester United is a gift, financially, supporter base, the team that they inherited, maybe it was aging, but I just found that an extraordinary comment, and it portrayed, I think, some of what went wrong in the wake of Ferguson's departure. You needed somebody who appreciated that legacy and was grateful for it, not who viewed it as a burden.
100%. And we'll end the Woodward chat on this. He had 8 years in his role at the club and 3 trophies, but nothing since 2017. 4 Champions League qualifications. And I think it's crazy. That now in articles that Champions League qualifications count as some sort of medal to be worn. But I'm sure a lot of fans will be happy to see the back of Ed Woodward and looking forward to something brighter and better in the future, fingers crossed.